After years of rumored development, expectation upon announcement, delays, reworkings, and ultimately anticipated waiting, LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga has finally arrived. As both the most revolutionary and ambitious LEGO game in the multi-decade history of TT games, not only did it deliver, but as it stands, provides serious contention with Elden Ring as early competition for the 2022 Game of the Year. The Skywalker Saga completely remakes the universally loved complete saga from the ground up, sacrificing classics for similarly exciting, truer-to-story-based levels full of Arkham-inspired RPG combat and a surprising amount of bosses. To avoid confusion, I'm only going to be counting the bosses from the core 9 episodes and no external Galaxy free-play mini-bosses, meaning specifically no capital ships nor side mission enemies take the Crate Dragon. However, I will be counting all of the bosses from the main game, a grand total of 36, including the ship fights as well. As both a celebration of old and introduction of new, this game manages to keep the goofy LEGO tone with carefully inserted comedy, all the while staying true to its modernized, renovated combat and story. This is one of few examples where something so internationally marketed before release broke all expectations to such a degree, and with that, the quality of its bosses were no small feat. Let's get into it. So, is this a boss? Well, the title card leads me to say yes, although it took me by such a surprise that I didn't have time to start recording on Elgato before it faded off. I had fun, I guess, although after 9 episodes, repeated MacGuffin arcs After 9 episodes, the base combat isn't nearly as exhilarating as it was on release. Even in a LEGO game, Phasma can't catch a break. I hoped that her comics would give me some positive insight on her character, but even those, like everything with Phasma, were extremely unmemorable. Anyways, this is like Mr. Freeze from Arkham City if you had to stare at drywall between each takedown. This quote-unquote fight is different, but ingenuity doesn't always equate to quality. For as long as time, King Allant from Demon's Souls held firm as the easiest boss in an action game ever. Then recently, Elden Ring's Soldier of Godric laid claim to that title, and within mere months a boss that can't fight you wins, in my professional opinion, the prestigious Laughingstock Boss Award, perhaps forever. I guess canonically it makes sense, but when not fighting Jabba, chasing around Salacious Crumb gets really tedious. Your time would be better spent watching American Psycho 2. Just as it was in the movie, Rey beating up a hermit is as random as it was exciting. To my knowledge, Luke doesn't even fight back, so you're a f***ing asshole. Seeing as Luke is my favorite character, and FN2199 is a stormtrooper, I had a bit more fun fighting an unnamed man behind a mask. Same as Luke, although the Electro Staff is a neat weapon. BB Boss, I love that name, is yet another gimmick to waste your time. I tried my hardest to get 2 energy sources at once, although that doesn't work. Would have much preferred a Tom and Jerry fight between the 2 BBs. If only further evidence, I'm not huge on gimmick-based encounters. And as arguably the Last Jedi's best fight, the LEGO Finn vs. Phasma 2, ultimately a test of aim assist, delivered about as well as Ben Askren did with Jake Paul. The least they could have done was a combat gimmick like Phasma's boss from LEGO The Force Awakens, but as is, the ensuing non-boss fight ATST bit was far better in every noteworthy category. In fairness, I think this was better off left as a cutscene. Role-playing as the compacted within the trash compactor was different, however the scripted compressing over, say, a timed encounter made this far less engaging. Look for the head to pop out every few seconds and collect the endless flow of falling studs in the meantime. Great in squadrons, and boring in a game not entirely centered around flying. I'm not an avid supporter of this game's flying mechanics to begin with, not saying they're particularly bad, just somewhat frustrating at times, and in a fight as simple as this, the small but noticeable boring side of this game's face shows itself. At a minimum, you could have blown up the shield generators, a shield generator, but as you'll see with nearly all flying bosses, radar towers and turrets are about as deep cut as they come. Next. As I said, nearly all flying bosses. What makes a seismic charge so special is that they're rare, and you can hear them. Minor negligence aside, this classic game of cat and mouse is oddly infuriating. It is admittedly neat flying through the, well, I'll say pores of the asteroids around Geonosis, however, once again an unnecessarily girthy health bar makes this fight long overstayed and even unrewarding by the end. An underwater boss is hard to come by, and for good reason. In fairness, the soul mechanic featured in this fight was pretty thrilling, seeing as it was, depending on your order, your first boss, and in turn I hold fish and bigger fish in high regards, relatively speaking. As proven time and time again, fighting something more than twice your size in a video game has to be done well for it to work. The Acklay specifically is an absolute nightmare to fight. Your best bet is to tank till you die, and again, until it dies. Unsurprisingly, the recently resurging Nexu is the most captivating of the three, with the Reek sitting in the bland nothingness tier right in between the two. I like this level's intro cutscene a lot. I laughed. Hee. Assassin Zam Wessel is one of few bosses I'd argue was done better in the complete saga. While flying in all corridors of the dirty underbelly of Coruscant was a scenic experience, this fight is far too long, slow, easy, and generally uninnovative to generate any excitement whatsoever. Even though I've gone on record now stating gimmicks aren't my preference, something as simple as a proton torpedo-induced barrier would have given the Attack of the Clones introduction much more depth than an orthodox chase. Now, this is technically the same as the Star Destroyer in that you destroy X amount of integral building structures along with ties and so on, however the separation comes in the trench run. You may, fairly, ask then, where does the Death Star fit in this equation? With no health bar and the entire level being dedicated solely to the trench run, I strayed away from that as there's no specific boss within the Death Star itself. I find driving in Sleet Rain easier to see than the ending of this fight, however the fun of flying on the teetering edges of death at any given moment is fun in of itself. While he rarely shows it, Boba actually does have most of his arsenal equipped and potentially for use in the first phase. With baiting, I managed to get him to pull out the flamethrower. Luke is not viable and you're better off as Lando gunning from a distance, however phase 2 completely changes this fight's dynamic. Boba boots up his Z6 and flies off the ship, utilizing rockets to counter the sail barge's guns you can use to drill him over normal blasters. Along with his even more embarrassing death, the second half of this fight brings it from incredibly underwhelming to above expectations. It wasn't until I fought the Fulminatrix that I realized how hideous the actual Dreadnought's design is. Albeit the LEGO version looks pretty good, and chipping away at this much larger ship's defenses was pretty engaging, more so with the increase in intensity through the proton torpedoes and large crowd of TIE fighters. The Trade Federation battleship is one of my favorite designs in all of Star Wars, and with its donut shape, the usual generic exterior destruction is much more atypical than previous. However, what truly brings this to a second gear beyond all other flying encounters is Anakin's mad dash within. For this not to be a cutscene and rather an all-encompassing fight sequence was a stroke of genius. It's not totally divergent from any given trench run level, but the intensity as well as the short amount of time spent actually inside the control ship makes the overall fight stand out that much more. Jango's formidable prowess really shows in this fight far more than in Attack of the Clones, surprisingly. While it boils down to endlessly chasing him around the arena with nothing incredibly different from the Boba fight nor his Kamino variant, simply it got tiresome having to follow him end to end after each and every 2 to 3 hit combo. Exhilaration only lasts as long as time permits it to, and due to repetition, the fun slowly dwindles over the course of Jango's final stand. As essentially a test of if you can spam the square button or not, Jabba's Rancor has nothing negative to it by nature. It's oddly similar to the multiple Rancors found in The Force Unleashed, although I did enjoy the bone in the mouth bit especially. After a really fun cutscene, I was not expecting a boss, although I've also seen this movie like 10 to 15 times, so that's sort of sad that I didn't in a way. With less room to maneuver and the addition of Slave 1, Jango is far more fun to fight in that it really is a gladiator bout in its purest form. While his moveset stays the same, the dark atmosphere of Tipoca City brings this fight to further heights than its later variations. So, I'll sort of open up here and say that the combat is extremely fun and I have no complaints, but due to this being a LEGO game and not a combat-oriented RPG, the actual mechanics of fighting, at least in terms of lightsaber duels, are all one and the same. With that said, this is personally my favorite scene from The Last Jedi, and the visual design of both the Praetorian Guard minifigures and Snoke's throne room itself was nailed. Slowly taking out each guard as both Rey and Kylo was fun, although I think this would have benefited greatly from being a gank over a stationary 1v1. This is the same as the Praetorian Guards, with the inclusion of very dodgeable lightning attacks from the Eternal Emperor. I only put it higher because the Knights of Ren are awesome, read The Rise of Kylo Ren, and Palpatine's quips are actually pretty funny.
Oh yeah? You and what lightning hands?
That's a Family Guy reference. Getting a Vader and Luke team up was pretty neat, although the moment was sort of ruined in once again a very similar mechanic to the same boss from The Force Unleashed by royal guards who intervene in between each Force Lightning segment. The ending was pretty awesome, however, and with that, Sam Witwer's incredible Palpatine finally can rest. Somehow, well, f it, this joke's been done like 1,000 times. Yeah, he's back from the grave, limbs akimbo, and it's the same thing generally, just without external interference, plus the visuals of Palpatine's lightning and the Throne of the Sith are just really breathtaking. And finally, our first true lightsaber duel. In tandem with the movies, at rock bottom we find Obi-Wan versus General Grievous, with this fight being plagued with the taking way too long bug, as well as repetitive, even tedious filler puzzles between each segment of Grievous's health bar. It is neat how his moveset changes ever so slightly when each of his limbs get removed, although this fight ending in a simple quick time over anything a bit more creative hurt my overall opinion on the encounter. By no means is it bad, just Grievous suffers from the boredom of doing 10 minutes of puzzles for 2 minutes of fighting. Although it's only one spot higher, Dooku's death is levels above Grievous in that it's almost entirely a simple duel. However, with no puzzles, this fight once again fails to meet the very fine line between overdone and undercooked in terms of duels mixed with enigmas. The Super Battle droids are one of my favorite separatist droids, and their minor segments that fill in the gaps for the would-be puzzles add something, but once again the lack of inventiveness severely hurts Episode 3 Dooku for me. Surprisingly, this fight held much emotional weight. It's way different than any boss I've ever fought before in that you're playing as a force-projected Luke and dodge, dodge, dodge. Watching Kylo slowly burn in rage as you get drilled with more and more Mega Caliber 6s, it was just a great moment with fun, quick-time event gameplay to back. While surely one of The Empire Strikes Back's greatest moments, the following fight is okay. It's just a generic lightsaber duel with a $9 minifigure and cutscene that makes a really great end to the fight. Otherwise, the Vader fights that precede his initial bout with Luke, although that isn't the case anymore thanks to Star Wars 2015, are far more creative. Even though the combat is the same as his Episode 3 duel, getting to play as Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Yoda was really great, and the atmosphere created in the moments of darkness, with Dooku's echoing voice nightmarishly describing your demise, was really fantastic, especially with a headset for audio. While the majority of the puzzles are almost exact replicas of Grievous's, they take far less time, and destroying the pillar was fairly fun. The comedic insertions and gameplay itself were greatly enjoyable, leaving the first of two Dooku encounters as the superior variant. Darth Vader fanboy Ben Solo in his weakest state is still one of the game's best bosses. This is one of the few times where the lack of lightsaber combat disparity among characters really stood out, because I think it would have been more enjoyable if this was just one very long fight where you did less damage as Finn and eventually swapped in as Rey and took it all the way to the destruction of Ilum. The break in fighting was unnecessary, albeit short, although the setting of the holiest of Jedi planets slowly crumbling around you added lots of depth. While I think this fight was pretty bad in the actual movie, the LEGO version was very fun and I had a good time. Yet another Kylo boss, generally the same gimmick. You fight, he runs, meet in a grander arena. Oddly enough, the pause between segments was far more boring in this case, but the longer lasting second half of the duel on the Death Star 2's remains when compared to the boss on Starkiller Base makes it more enjoyable, as well as the unintentional levity of getting Dark Souls pancaked by waves was hilarious. It's not leaps and bounds above his fellow fights, but the final showdown between Rey and Kylo was without a doubt the best of the lot in my opinion. With no Jedi's Fury as background music, the emotion of this fight was definitely hurt. The first phase isn't anything special realistically, but with your surrender and the destruction of the bridge as seen in the movie, the stealth bit was good. Yeah, finally, it worked, perhaps because it was an extremely memorable moment from personally my favorite duel in Star Wars and overall one of the most emotional scenes in the saga. Nonetheless, the mechanics of it were great and the short second phase that follows once Vader finds you adds up. With far less health, the conflicted Vader versus enraged, force-amped Luke goes down almost instantly, giving a quick but satisfying conclusion to Darth Vader as a character. Fighting along Qui-Gon is great, and although I haven't done this yet, I can imagine the two-player experience for this is probably very cool. The first phase of the Duel of the Fates felt perfectly balanced, and having that option to swap between the two made it that much more exciting. After trudging through waves of battle droids, the second phase on the Plasma Refinery Complex's bridge is neat and corresponds to the movie in some ways, namely how you attack Maul from both sides repeatedly as both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. After some platforming and another bridge duel, you then make it to this game's most controversial sequence by a mile. I mean, this is like totally ridiculous. I think it's a really dumb topic to freak out over, as many Star Wars fans have. What I'm talking about is that even though you fight only as Obi-Wan in the last phase, Qui-Gon doesn't die until after you segment Maul like an orange. People, it's also a LEGO game, and I'll change the topic here. What about, like, Cobb Vanth just not dying in Boba Fett? Sort of unrelated, but in a logical sense, neither work, except one is canon and one is created for the intention of comedic delivery. While maybe not as good as the admittedly nostalgia-benefited original, Darth Maul was a fantastic fight and the Duel of the Fates lived up to expectation. Finally, Anakin vs. Obi-Wan makes it into a boss fight. After fighting Anakin in the Complete Saga, Anakin and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith, Anakin in The Force Unleashed, it goes on forever. There's never been Battle of the Heroes as backdrop for any boss, ever. It's my favorite theme in Star Wars, and to have it finally makes both this and, as you'll see, Vader vs. Obi-Wan on Mustafar that much more special. As well, while Sidious's lightning is integral to this fight, it's not his only mechanic. The first phase is a mixture of a waiting game where Sidious is invincible and spurts out a wide variety of Force Lightning moves, and then after a short stint where you can rack up free hits, a lightsaber duel follows. This trend continues into the Senate chamber, where you hop from podium to podium, duel in the birthplace of the Galactic Empire, and type in codes? As the most film-accurate duel in the game, there's so much to love about Yoda vs Darth Sidious, and its wide mixture of mechanical ingenuity and variation in gameplay makes it absolutely deserving of a top 3 spot. As definitely a shock to most, the Battle of the Heroes finds itself, for once, not the best duel in Star Wars. Realistically, my choice between this and the number 1 is like choosing between Rebels and Clone Wars for me, a 9.9 versus a 9.95. However, the repetitive combat with no significant differences in fighting aside from the platforming, as well as the lack of platforming when compared to the original fight, makes it a bit less engaging. The quick combat feels at an all-time high in the extremely small arenas you fight in through each of the phases of this duel, and the breaks where you play as 3PO and R2 feel necessary to slow down the pacing. With, once again, one of John Williams' greatest themes as ambiance for this encounter, Anakin vs Obi-Wan just barely loses out on being the best boss in the Skywalker Saga. And we hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe so as to stay up to date on all of our future uploads, and be on the lookout for the finale of our 4-part Elden Ring boss ranking coming out next Wednesday. Otherwise, once again, thank you for watching, and with that said, deuces.